remember earlier on in my career, like the second job that I had, it was the jack of all trades kind of hat where you came in and after delivering a certain project, let's say it was a backend TypeScript server, whatever it was, you could come in the next week on that Monday and be like, okay, we have an iOS project that's coming up, 3, 2, 1, get after it. Which I didn't mind. Early on, I was ready to learn about everything and on any given platform, any language, just because I did want to have exposure to all of the things, all the different possible, avenues I could eventually niche down into or master if I had sufficient interest in it. Mm-hmm. And that's why I valued it. Slowly over time, it became too much breadth and not enough depth for me. And so was still happy to adhere to all the goals of the company at that time. And luckily it did transition for me very nicely into being a little bit more linear in one direction. For me, that was server-side development at large. Mm-hmm. But the one thing that I did want to avoid was becoming a rote robot that was just pumping out like front ends all the time in the same language, doing similar projects. And I think that can happen where you do end up having a role where it is just very repetitive and you're using all the same tooling and all the same, not that it's a bad thing. If you have plenty of things you love to do outside of work and work is work for you and, you're just there to get the job done, rock on. I get it.
That's great. Yeah. Like I know there are people, I know I'm not one of these, but I know there are people who are extremely happy pumping out WordPress sites, WordPress marketing style sites. Mm-hmm. And it serves a great role. There's a lot of companies that's all they need. And so good on them for finding that niche.
Right.
I just know I like the challenge. So I like the challenge of going deeper than that. And that's just not my area.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, it sounds like the project you were doing with Iron Ruby. It definitely doesn't sound like you'd be wanting to pump out the WordPress sites like that, going down to that level.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned that differentiation of like early on versus later in your career of like wanting to learn everything versus not. For me, I think I had a similar thing as well. Like early on, I wanted to try everything. I wanted to learn everything. I wanted to know everything, and quickly realized, you can't. And the first conscious recognition of that, I think, for me was when I was at Rooster Park, was working with a company that had some security holes in the way they were doing their code, and was trying to prove it. I was a contractor basically for them, so I was trying to prove it to the engineers to try to get them to take ownership and realize that they needed to change direction. Mm-hmm. I was having some trouble, and I went and ran this tool called SQL Map. Didn't know much about it when I started running it. Went and found it. It's a SQL injection attack vector. It's kind of like the Metasploit toolkit, where it's for white hat hackers a way to test a SQL database that you have access to.
Okay.
But so I pointed it at my local development server and let it run, and it's sitting there spitting out every attack that it's trying against the database. And some of them, they're straightforward. The ones I know, SQL injection,
sure,
attempts of escalation of privileges, that kind of thing. But then it's throwing out all these things like union-based attacks and this-based attacks, collation-based attacks, and I'm just like, I didn't even know these were attack vectors.
Yep.
And it was kind of this just realization, like, I know a little bit about security. I feel like I know enough to do my day-to-day job, and I know enough to know when I need to go talk to somebody who is a security expert to get advice. But that was one of the times when I was like realizing this entire world, like this was just SQL attacks, and it was this entire world I didn't know. And you start to expand that beyond SQL, and there's that entire scope. And it was just like this. I could go down that path if I really wanted to, but I'm happy here, and so I'm going to just let that lie.
Yeah, and
that conscious choice of I'm not going to go pursue understanding everything I'm seeing here.
And that's trying to hit every mole that pops up and trying to learn everything. Like you said, you can have a given day, like you were just explaining, where you do have, your brain explodes when you find out that there is so much more to it. And that certainly time is finite, and you're not going to have the time, or you'd have to at least choose, especially if you're early on in your career, you have the, I guess, ability or, you're able to choose what you want to spend your time on more so. But you do come across things like that. And for me, I always put my nose up at security because I was always in the startup mentality with whatever I was doing. That changed when I got into my professional career, just because you have to focus on it. But luckily, if you're fortunate enough, you have a team that can handle that stuff, because it is certainly daunting. I have a couple of friends that work in the AppSec industry. Some of them devs, some of them on the sales or marketing side. And even they will come to me and just, ask me questions on any given day. And I'll have no idea what they're talking about security wise. I'm like, yeah, I'm very glad that I stay in my own little circle of competence when it comes to being a developer. And then I can offload some of that stuff to people who know what they're doing, because you are painfully made aware of how naive or ignorant you are in certain realms. And just deciding to stay away from them and not sink all your time into them can be tricky.